Hi, welcome to Knitted. My name is Ted. I'm a knitting teacher up here in St. Paul, Minnesota. Today I want to talk about Judy's Magic Cast-On. It's one of my favorite cast-ons. I use it all the time. Anytime I need a tubular cast-on or a provisional cast-on, I'll use Judy's Magic Cast-On to get that started up. Judy Becker developed this cast-on as a beginning for toe-up socks. I don't really knit socks, so I don't use it that way, but I use it lots of other ways. So for the cast-on, you'll need the project yarn. There's no waste yarn involved in this one, and some knitting needles. You'll need either one long knitting needle that you could fold in half for a magic loop kind of situation, or two needles that would also be a circular needle. So I'm going to use two needles for this one. In this case, my needles are different needle sizes. I'm going to use a larger one that would be like for stockinette, and a smaller one that eventually I might use for my ribbing. This is not going to really become a project, so I don't have to worry about that. We're going to cast on stitches onto both of these needles, and there'll be a row of stockinette that goes between them as well. So when we've done our cast on, we actually already completed one full row of stockinette also. For a provisional cast on, which is how I'll be using this one, we're going to have the full number of stitches on both needles. So if we need to cast on 100 stitches, there'll be 100 stitches on the top needle and 100 stitches on the bottom needle. In this case, we're just going to do, I don't know, a dozen stitches or so. We're going to start out with a slingshot setup and a long tail. The tail should be about 3 times as long as the project that you're going to make. And it could go in the front or the back. It sort of depends on what you're going to do after you finish the cast on. In this case, I'm going to put it in front. So I've got it set up. That's plenty long of a tail for the number of stitches that we'll do. And the first stitch gets just twisted onto the top needle. So I just put the yarn between the two needles, bring it forward, and there's my stitch 1. So now from here out, we'll put a stitch on the bottom needle and a stitch on the top needle. We'll just alternate back and forth. And they get yarn from the opposite yarn. So the bottom needle gets the top yarn, the top needle gets the bottom yarn. So I need a bottom stitch because I've got a top stitch. So I go rotate all the way up above the yarn and then come down in front and wrap it between the two needles. That has a stitch now. Now I rotate down just so my top needle is right above that bottom yarn, and I bring it through between the two needles and go up, and then all the way there. Rotate down, grab that yarn, rotate back up, and then behind and through, down, through and over, bringing the needles behind, and that goes through. Bring the yarn through between and over. So you can see you can get pretty fast at this once you practice. It takes some coordination. And now I want to also check here. I've got my last stitch was a top stitch, and so now I need to put on a bottom stitch. So that goes to the top yarn, goes onto the bottom, and that'll be all the stitches I do for today. So next I'm going to work my first row. And in this case, I'm just going to be working flat. So I'm going to turn the needles around. So I'm looking at the back side. And here you can really see those pearls are right in there. So that's the beginning of my first row of stockinette. And now I'm going to purl across this top needle because that's my project needle. The first thing I'm going to do is actually pull this long. Gives me a little bit extra slack. And tension my yarn. And you can see that yarn is coming actually from the bottom needle, which just helps me tension it a little bit. So you're out of there, you come around, everything's a little tiny bit tangly. So I'm going to purl across this first row because I want to be working in stockinette. So purl here, purl, that's done. I can turn around and then I would knit. I could just keep on going back and forth. So then this will become my project, and then these stitches are just hanging out. I can move them onto waste yarn. I can put them onto an extra cord from an interchangeable set onto holdfast cords, whatever I need to just kind of keep them out of my way. Sometimes I find that if I just leave it on needles, the tips get in my way, so I usually kind of use waste yarn or an interchangeable cord. Okay, so that is Judy's Magic Cast-On for a provisional cast-on. We'll look at it next, Judy's Magic Cast-On for a... We'll look at it next as Judy's Magic Cast-On for a tubular cast-on. See you in a minute. So let's look at Judy's Magic Cast-On as a tubular cast-on. I love tubular cast-ons. I think they look professional. They match tubular bind-offs. They're a great intro to 1x1 ribbing. People use them for 2x2 as well, though I'm not quite as much of a fan of that. The normal way people are doing it is kind of twisty and, for me, very frustrating. But I think this way, using Judy's, is much more stable. It's easy to keep everything in line, and it's quick to do as well. So I'm going to start with actually a larger needle size. This would be the size that I would use for the stockinette proportion of the knitting. So the ribbing needle would usually be smaller than this by a couple sizes. We are making 2 to 3 rows of stockinette depending on how many rows you do. So it makes sense that we're going to use the stockinette size needle. So the other thing with Judy's Magic Cast-On and tubular is every stitch counts. So if we need 20 stitches, we'll have 10 on each needle. We'll do 12 stitches, so we'll put 6 on each needle. So there's 1, there's 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. If we were working flat, we might end up with an odd number, so then we would have it start with a knit stitch on each side of our ribbing, but we're going to just do it like this. So now I'm going to rotate 90 degrees, boom, and start knitting across. So now I'm going to knit across one row. You can see my working yarn is now coming from the bottom needle, so that just helps me tension it more. This is still kind of a loosey-goose stitch. It'll take care of itself as we go along. So I rotate 90 degrees, I pull out my bottom needle, and I'm going to just knit across these top 6 stitches, holding that kind of in place. It's sort of a pretend stitch, but it takes care of itself eventually. So there's all those knit across. One thing I could look at now is this is my outside stitch. So that's going to be the first one that I'm going to work when I go back to my ribbing. So now rotate 90 degrees again. Sorry, 180 degrees. Push my needle tips in. And come with my ribbing needle. So now I'm going to be knitting from this and purling, and knit and purl, knit and purl. So every other stitch is going to get put onto here. So now instead of having 6 stitches each on 2 needles, I'm going to have 12 stitches on 1 needle. So I'm going to start with this knit stitch. Push that in a little bit. So knit that first stitch. And then I have to rotate a little bit to get into purl this stitch. And then knit this stitch. And purl this stitch. And knit. And purl. And knit. And purl. Knit. Purl. Knit. That one's done. And this last one, purl. Okay. So that is now a tubular cast on. We can see it just kind of rolls around like that. So now we would turn. And if I was working in the round, I would join in the round now, or I can work back and forth. Either way, All depends on the pattern. Let's get that out of the way. Let's just work one row so we can see a little bit more how that tube is setting up. You might notice that I don't purl the way most people purl. And so my stitches are mounted differently than most people are. And I'll probably one day do a video about that too. But it's not really super germane to how this all works. There's one more row, and you can really see now more even how that is all set up. So I hope that helps, and I hope it helps everybody get into doing tubular cast-ons because I do think they look great. Thank you. Bye-bye.